Okay. Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Educator, historian Alan Singer with us again for Media Watch. And yes, we will need some historical perspective on some of these issues. Of course, the primary one we can use some historical perspective is I saw where recently we're taping this show the Wednesday before what normally would be a Monday airing, being brought to you by EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and eventually on Manhattan Neighborhood Network sometime in the month of September and or October. But the earlier this week or late last week, earlier this week that we're taping, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House, agreed to bow to the wishes of his hard right Freedom Caucus, whatever that caucus, crazy caucus is in the House of Representatives that seems to do all kinds of non-legislative things to gum up the works of government. But he said, yes, let's have an inquiry, an impeachment inquiry against the sitting president, Joseph R. Biden. Alan or Ray, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the Republicans, before Joe Biden got sworn into office, already wrote down terms and facts of planning to impeach him before he was even sworn into office? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, one of their loonies, this guy Matt Gaetz from Florida, when they agreed that McCarthy could be Speaker of the House, they insisted that they have the right, any one of these 46 lunatics would have the right to get rid of him unless he acquiesced to what they wanted. So their plan is always to shut down government, create a crisis, and then blame it on the Democrats. This is people who are anti-government, addressing the issues that people face.
Yeah, but the impeachment thing on Biden was, Ray, didn't we see something about them saying we're going to impeach him? We don't care what he does when he gets in office.
At one time, this is a continuation of their practices since the Obama administration, though. They've just ramped it up a little more.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's payback for bringing Trump up on charges.
Okay. Well, yeah, we knew that was why they said they were going to impeach Biden even before he got into office. But tell me a little bit about the background of what most of the impeachment experts have had to say once Kevin McCarthy acquiesced to those stupid demands by this caucus in his right, far right, extreme right caucus. What was the pushback from even some of his own Republican senators like Lisa Murkowski and other people? Or
the thing is that generally, before you have an investigation, you have to get approval from the House. McCarthy bypassed broader approval because people couldn't stomach this, because there are no grounds for this.
Okay.
Joe Biden did not commit high crimes and misdemeanors, which is what Donald Trump committed. Now, what they're saying is that Joe Biden has a 53-year-old son who's a no-good-nick. And you know something? He is a no-good-nick. The reality is, I have a son who's 45. I'm not responsible for the things he does. And Joe Biden is not responsible for Hunter Biden. And they're trying to make Joe Biden denounce his son. And he says, I can't do it. It's my son. So this is just absurd. But the hypocrisy is, and this is what gets me, Hunter Biden has no role in government. Well, but Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner did have government positions. And while Jared was a special advisor to the president, he negotiated a make-believe peace deal for the Middle East with Saudi Arabia. And then as soon as he left office, he got billions of dollars from Saudi Arabia for his hedge fund. That's corruption. Hunter Biden, whatever he did, had nothing to do because he did not have government office.
But they're trying to claim collusion between the president and his son.
Yes, that's correct, Raymond.
So they're going beyond the actual facts and trying to implicate the president.
So,
That seems to be their main argument there.
so I have seen reports that members of the Republican Party, if I can find the story, I'll pull it up. But some of the Republicans were saying, look, we seem to be setting the bar for impeachment kind of low here because, and this came out of the mouth of one of the Republicans, haven't seen any evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay. So what are the grounds on which we're basing these impeachment charges? And so the guy who normally would be more grown up, Mitt Romney, came out and said, look, an impeachment inquiry is not the same as an impeachment. And because there's all this potential smoke, these aren't his words, these are me paraphrasing, seems to be something going on there. We need to look at that. And so, yes, I'm in favor of the House looking at the possibility that where there is smoke, there may be some fire. That's as strong as he could come out with it. But he was in favor of the House doing this. A couple of other Republicans said, I don't know what they're looking for. So far, all the digging they've done, I'm paraphrasing here, they don't seem to have found anything. So what are they basing this impeachment on? Boom. So to make a long story short, Raymond, you're correct. They want to find something, and so they're going to launch an inquiry, but they have no grounds right now based on their own already long investigative digging into the connection between Hunter Biden and his father. They have not found anything to tie the two together.
And that stops them from doing this?
The news becomes the investigation, not any collusion. And that's what they're counting on, that people say, oh, he's being investigated. But that doesn't mean there's ever going to be any evidence.
So they taint his reputation through influence.
Yeah. So they're hoping that just by saying he's being investigated for corruption, he's going to be painted with the tar brush of corruption.
Right. Well, like, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yes. Okay.
That's
that presupposes I've ever beat my wife, and I don't know where you got that presupposition, but
or that you played in the NBA, or that you played in the NBA.
Well, so all right. So we understand this is all politically motivated. It's revenge. It's not porn, but in the case of revenge porn, it's political revenge porn because the Democrats impeached Donald Trump twice. So Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and the wackos in that part of that Republican Party decide they must, note the word must, impeach Joe Biden, correct? That's it in a nutshell. All right, enough for that. But speaking of federal government and craziness in the federal government, the secondary story, actually the big story at Media Watch we should be looking at is the fact that the Justice Department has decided they're going to go after Google as a giant monopoly, because Google search engine, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is like 90% the de facto default search engine, and DOJ's position, and I expect you guys to dig into the actual charges, is that Google is using their size, their monopoly, their power, and their pocketbook to monopolize the search engine market. What's the you want to lay out the DOJ's charges, Raymond, or Alan, one of you?
Alan, I think that's your realm.
All right. Well, we were talking about it before. Google collects data, and it uses the data, and it uses cookies in its search engines to trace what we search for, what we buy online, and then it uses that to sell advertising. That's how Google makes its money.
Right.
Now, I use Google. I really think it's the most effective search engine for me, has a lot of options, Google Scholar, Google Map,
Mhm,
Google Translate. These are all things that I use.
mhm.
Uh, it turns out that Google pays, I think this is what you said, Ray, Apple $12 billion
$12
a year.
billion a year. A year. That's a year, not over the course of a period of time. $12 billion a year.
But why?
Well, because they pay Apple 12 billion a year to keep them as their primary search engine on all of their devices across the board.
Okay,
I-
that's a big chunk of money, but Apple sells a lot of devices. And if you're the default search engine, your search engine is going to be used by a hell of a lot of people.
By almost everybody. Most people will not change their search engine. I stopped using Google about 2 years ago.
Mhm.
I use well, not to give anybody a plug, but I use Safari now, and I have been for the past 2 years. And I've turned off all of my tracking, which most people don't do. Most people, I'm not sure that most people are aware that they can prevent tracking. Most computers have built into their web browser the ability to turn off ad tracking.
Mhm.
And I suggest that you do that, by the way. And I've done that. I don't use Google unless I absolutely have to, which is not very often. And I'll never use them again. I just don't care to be tracked. I don't want a profile of my spending, my visitations, where I'm traveling to, what I'm eating.
Yeah,
And they track all of that. Google tracks every bit of it, except when you're asleep.
So,
If you're online, Google is watching.
well, everybody's watching. That's why you got these
Well,
smart
everybody
devices
is watching, but
watching
specifically
and
Google,
listening. Your, your
Google makes
smartphone's
this
listening to you. Your refrigerator, if you got a smart refrigerator, is listening to you, spying on you. Your television is definitely spying on you. So we found Big Brother, and Big Brother is us, as Pogo said 60 years ago. For the younger generation who don't know Pogo, yeah, Google Walt Kelly and Pogo. You'll get an education. But anyway, so Alan, to pick up on the significance of this suit, because it gets to the heart of whether the government's antitrust arm in the
And 30
Department of
states are
Justice has
involved.
any teeth, correct?
Yeah, under antitrust laws, it's illegal for a company to grow so large that it dominates the whole market, even if it doesn't own the whole market. And this was used to break up AT&T. This was used to break up Esso, in New Jersey. So this has been a powerful weapon to protect the consumer so that we have real options. Now, what happens if Google loses the case? It will no longer be able to contract with all these other companies to insist that they basically only use the Google software.
Mhm.
What now? We don't even, Google also operates YouTube, and Google operates something called cloud computing. Cloud computing, I really don't know what it is. I think it's magic, but so I don't use it. But there was a case 20 years ago where the federal government brought up on Microsoft on charges for dominating the personal computer industry. But what happened is Microsoft reached an agreement to change some of its practices, so the case was never resolved and never set a precedent.
But weren't they broken up into two companies? Microsoft, one to handle internet and one to handle everything else?
That I don't know.
No, I don't think so, because they still had Netscape as part of their search engine, even though it went defunct and they finally discontinued it. But when the government settled with Microsoft, they basically, or let Microsoft settle,
Off the hook.
they made them give up certain things, not divest into a separate company. And I forget what the other thing was, but they couldn't prevent computer manufacturers from bundling other software on their products. And so that's what they had been using their muscle to do, to
Yeah.
make sure they just bundle Microsoft Windows as opposed to somebody else's software. So the settlement, Microsoft basically said, we don't want to take this all the way through in case we lose. And so they gave up a few things, but it looked to me, based on what I read, you can correct me, Alan, looked like a stalemate to me with maybe Microsoft giving in a little bit.
Yeah.
But we never got a federal ruling. And so this is the government coming back to say, we need to try to get a hold of making sure we can control monopolistic practices, because I think if the government loses, it makes Amazon and a bunch of other big monopolistic giants that exist right now feel a lot safer, because the government will think twice about coming after them, because Amazon is a giant monopoly.
Yeah.
And so the way Google is, and Amazon and Google are sort of similar. And so Amazon is definitely watching this rivetingly.
You know, this kind of leads into the issue right now. There are hearings in Congress on regulating all the tech companies, because the tech companies as private businesses do what they want. And their goal is to make profit, not the public interest.
That's right.
And they use their platforms to spread lies. They use their platforms to influence elections. And it's very scary. And there was just a court case in New Orleans.
So this actually segues to the other story that we really should talk about. Is this New Orleans case similar to the one that the government got slapped on the wrist for? Okay, let's give our folks the background on that.
Well, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, New Orleans, and again, it's complicated beyond me. They ruled that the Biden administration had overstepped First Amendment by urging major social media platforms to remove misleading or false content about COVID-19. So the government tried to say and influence them to stop lies. Now, this case is not really about freedom of speech. It's really about freedom of lies. It's another example of a right-wing control over the American judicial system that wants to block government efforts to protect Americans from corporate misbehavior and lying. It's not surprising that one of the judges in his 3-court panel was appointed by George W. Bush, and the other 2 by Donald Trump. The lawsuit itself was pressed by something called New Civil Liberties Alliance, and that's a fake civil liberties group. It's funded by the Koch brothers, it's funded by the Donor Fund and other right-wing groups, and it represents plaintiffs challenging gun control and COVID pandemic restrictions and fighting labor organizing. So this is not about free speech. This is about stopping the government from protecting us.
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's a problem for me with the fact that they are trying to handcuff the government and tell them that they cannot try to protect the health and well-being of the American citizenry, right? Because they claim the government had used its power to coerce the social media companies to do its bidding. And the Republicans were claiming that the social media companies were in collusion with the government to limit free speech, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is the federal judge, when he ruled on the thing, the wording, and I need to find it to quote it properly, he was saying they could not find that the FBI had, their speech had been coercive based on the records they had, but it was that they had the weight of the federal government behind their requests for the social media companies to take down those false things. So
No evidence, but it was potential.
yeah, there is no evidence in the emails and the records that they studied that there was any coercive language, but because they had the weight of the federal government behind them, that, according to his interpretation, made it coercive. I found that Alice in Wonderland reasoning, as far as I was concerned. I thought that was crazy. And you cannot, what happened to the promote the general welfare clause in the Constitution? Why does not that have as much precedence in a federal court as supposed free speech? That actually is basically not free speech. It's like crying fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. And so just because social media platforms are on a global scale doesn't mean that they are not erroneously crying fire when there's no fire, and that they should not be stopped. They need to be curtailed. They need to be policed. And this ruling does not allow the government to police them the way they should. So I don't know. We need to get some First Amendment people and some other promote the general welfare experts to weigh in on the legality, illegality, the rightness, the wrongness of this appellate court's interpretation of what the federal government did. I think this appellate court was wrong. I think it's detrimental to our elections, to the health and well-being of the country. And case in point, some of the people that online, like the Patriot Front people who write all those hate messages online, and guess what? Not just online. There was a case in Martha's Vineyard a couple of weeks ago. I think it was a September 7th headline date. They'd be posting all these white supremacist things in front of black store owners' places up on Martha's Vineyard. Okay? Now, the Martha's Vineyard cops are up in arms about this. They want to know who the heck's doing it. They'd like to nab them because, as far as they're concerned, that's not acceptable. But based on this ruling, the Martha's Vineyard cops would be out of line if they snatched those signs and arrested those people, because they would be, quote, curtailing their free speech rights, correct? If you take it to their logical conclusion. So, yeah, I think this is crap, this appellate ruling.
Yeah. One thing I would change, Eric, is the government was not policing them. The government was raising questions with them about what it meant to be as a responsible corporation.
You're correct. And I say policing them because if you do not, like, if they didn't pass that Ku Klux Klan law in 1877 or whenever they passed it, there'd be a whole lot of stuff that happened in the 19th century that they could never have stopped. And that was a law to police bad, hateful behavior. And I'm saying there are laws on the books that says you can police these folk. But the fact that they're raising it as a free speech issue means you can't go after them. So yeah, I'm correct in that I want them to police these people for doing and allowing bad things. And you're correct in that they're just trying to convince them to do right. And the government said we weren't actually coercing them, we're asking them to do right by the general public.
Well,
So
my question is, who's policing the police?
yeah, right. But you know where I'm coming from. Okay. So so how are we doing on time? Because I know there's a couple of other stories we want to get to.
We got about 3.5 minutes.
Really? Okay, quick,
Yeah.
like the refugee story, right? New York, Mayor Adams, federal government. Take the lead on that one, Alan, because we don't have that much time on it.
Well, there are about 100,000 refugees, asylum seekers now in the city of New York. And the Mayor Eric Adams had argued that this potentially could destroy the city and has called for severe budget cuts in municipal services to cover services to the refugees. And I don't think the city is going to be destroyed, but I think that Adams has raised some important issues. I don't have a simple answer to what's got to take place, But I want to make 4 quick points. The Republicans are making the crisis worse by funneling refugees from the southern border to northern cities. Republicans have blocked all immigration reform, and they want to make the situation worse as a political strategy for 2024. The second issue is that the 14th Amendment to the Constitution ensures that all people have a right to due process. And that guarantees that refugees cannot just be summarily deported without their day in court. And that's why they're here. I think New York City law guarantees shelter to all people. So it'd be illegal, inhumane, and a public health disaster not to turn refugees out. But I think the last key point here, the refugee crisis is not going to go away, and it will probably escalate because of the impact of climate change on Mexico and Central America. There needs to be a federal response, and that's where I agree with Eric Adams, to the refugee crisis, and it's going to have to be on the magnitude of the COVID pandemic response. Nothing short of that is going to address it.
Well, Alan, here, John McCain is about the last Republican. I shouldn't say just John McCain, but John McCain and fellow Democrat, I forget who it was, were the last 2 people to put their heads together to try to come up with a comprehensive
We have about a minute, Eric.
immigration reform package, right? And
2008.
did craft something, and I think they crafted it during the George W. Bush administration.
Right. Just before the Obama administration.
Yeah. And I don't believe it actually came to a vote because some other Republicans did not want it to happen for some reason. That much I remember. I don't remember the reason, but it didn't come to a vote. And so we've been in the morass of no immigration reform, and it has caused us a bunch of problems over the years. And so you're right, there's no easy solution, but we're gonna have to revisit all these stories in the next near future. This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer. Thank you for having me.
And thanks for joining us, folks. Catch us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT, and it's on LinkedIn and down the road on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and we'll catch you the next time.